Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
There's a scene in the 1997 movie Face Off where Danny Masterson, then a teen actor, plays a character who forces himself on a teenage girl in the backseat of a car. A year after that movie came out, Masterson would go on to play his breakout role as Steve Hyde on TV's That 70s Show, instantly catapulting him to fame. His role in that Face-Off movie didn't really become notable until decades later, until 2017. Because in March of that year, it became publicly known that Danny Masterson had been accused of sexual assault by 3 women. The women, along with Masterson, were all Scientologists who dated him while he was on That 70s Show. They would later claim that the Church of Scientology played a major role in covering up the abuse and in attempting to make sure that they never exposed the assaults to police or to the public. But all that changed and came to a shocking conclusion earlier this year. You may have seen it in the headlines. Actor Danny Masterson went on trial for rape. I was a fan of That 70s Show, and I loved his character on it, so I knew I needed to learn more. Not only about the allegations, but about what happened at the trial. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in the courtroom for this one, but we were able to score an interview with someone who was there for the entire thing. And so in today's episode, we're going to explore the court cases that put Danny Masterson, a once beloved actor, on trial for rape. And we'll delve into the role that the Church of Scientology played in Masterson's life and in his defense. This is Jillian in partnership with Law and Crime. You are listening to Court Junkie, episode 249. Tony Ortega is a journalist whose website, The Underground Bunker, is one of the foremost media outlets in the world covering the Church of Scientology. Before that, he was the editor-in-chief of The Village Voice in New York City and had covered Scientology for years.
And at some point, I just sort of made the decision, I'm going to become the daily beat reporter for Scientology, because there had been so many wonderful investigations by the Tampa Bay Times, by the Los Angeles Times. But you know what happens is a big story comes out, it makes some noise, and then in a few days, people kind of forget about it. And I realized that what this subject could use is that daily observation that a beat reporter brings to it.
The Church of Scientology plays a pretty significant role in the allegations against Danny Masterson. But what is it exactly? Here are the basics, according to Tony.
Right. So Scientology was started by a science fiction writer named L. Ron Hubbard, who in 1950 came out with a book claiming to have the first real understanding of how the human mind works. And eventually, within a few years, he was calling it Scientology.
That's the origin. And that's also where it gets a little unusual.
And it basically, the idea is that we are eternal beings called Thetans that have lived countless times. And the reason why we have troubles in our current lifetime is that we can't remember what we went through thousands and millions of years ago. So what Scientology essentially is past life therapy, where they encourage you to remember what happened to you millions of years ago.
L. Ron Hubbard knew he was pushing something unconventional to his 1950s American audience, so he came up with an innovative plan.
Hubbard knew that in order to get a more mainstream image, it would help if he had some, celebrities. So in 1955, he literally came out with something he called Project Celebrity and put a bounty on the heads of famous people.
For decades, the church didn't have much success recruiting celebrities.
But then in the 70s, it started to have some real, successes. They got Travolta in 75. They got Kirstie Alley in 79. They got Tom Cruise in 86.
The church started to get some favorable attention. But as years passed and more people got to understand the basics, fewer celebrities became interested. So today, you'll hear of celebrities who are Scientologists, such as Elizabeth Moss and Erica Christensen. Many are Scientologists because they were born into it. You can count Danny Masterson on that list. Danny was born in Long Island, New York, and he was from a showbiz family.
Danny Masterson and his brother, Christopher, got into modeling and acting very, very young. They were just little kids. Their mother, Carol Masterson, was their agent and manager and was, she was basically a, Hollywood mom, getting them into things as much as she could. And they had a lot of success. Danny was a cute kid. And before long, he was showing up in some, decent TV spots. And then, hit the big time around the year 1997, I think it was, or 98 is when that 70s show started. And, it was a huge success and a huge success for him.
Danny's brother Christopher starred in the sitcom Malcolm in the Middle from 2000 to 2006. He also has two other siblings in the business. Danny has appeared in over 100 commercials and in other TV shows you may have heard of, like NYPD Blue, Party of Five, and Roseanne. Danny's parents were also devout members of the Church of Scientology. He told Paper Magazine in 2015 that he began doing the religion's coursework when he was under the age of 10. When he read Dianetics at 15, he said, "It just blew my mind." After that 70s show ended in 2006, Danny continued to act. There were feature film roles, another sitcom, and in 2016, he landed the role of Jameson Rooster Bennett in the Netflix series The Ranch. But when 3 women came forward, accusing him of raping them, Danny's character was written off the show in the middle of the 3rd season. In March 2017, Tony Ortega broke the news that Danny was under criminal investigation by the Los Angeles Police Department, an investigation that seemed to move slowly. Here's Tony describing the story of the woman who would eventually be known as Jane Doe number 1.
On the early morning hours of April 25th, 2003, she right away went to the Church of Scientology and complained about it. Now, in Scientology, and she grew up in Scientology, so she knew the rules. You're not supposed to turn in a fellow Scientologist to the police. But she was unhappy with what was going on. They put her through bizarre past life therapy to try to find out why she was a victim in this lifetime. And she wanted to go to the LAPD, and they told her not to.
But eventually, she did go to the police.
In June 2004, she went to the LAPD. At that time, these 3 women were not aware of each other and didn't know there were multiple victims. So the LAPD investigated and closed, or the District Attorney's Office closed that investigation without charging Masterson in 2004.
Years went by, and it wasn't until 2016 that the women became aware of each other.
So only then did these women realize, wait a minute, I'm not the only one. And that's when they decided to go to the LAPD again for Jane Doe 1 and for the first time for the other 2. And so that's why this new investigation started in the fall of 2016.
And so the criminal investigation was opened in 2016. Tony reported on it in 2017.
I heard about it. I first broke the news about the investigation in March 2017. And part of the reason I did that was by that time, the investigation was in trouble. The LAPD was doing some bizarre things with it. The women were super unhappy, and it looked like it might be going off the rails. So I got to break that story. The LAPD did assign a different detective. It really seemed to get going better then.
Danny proclaimed his innocence in a statement to Us Weekly on December 5th, 2017. Quote, "I'm obviously very disappointed in Netflix's decision to write my character off of The Ranch. From day one, I have denied the outrageous allegations against me. Law enforcement invested these claims more than 15 years ago and determined them to be without merit. I have never been charged with a crime, let alone convicted of one. In this country, you are presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, in the current climate, it seems as if you are presumed guilty the moment you are accused. I understand and look forward to clearing my name once and for all. On August 22, 2019, while the criminal investigation was still ongoing, the three women accusing Danny Masterson of raping them filed a civil lawsuit against the Church of Scientology and Danny Masterson for harassing them.
In 2019, they filed a civil lawsuit that's separate from the rape allegations, saying that since they had come forward, they were subjected to bizarre surveillance, hacking, stalking. A couple of their pets had been poisoned, and they really believed the Church of Scientology was behind this. So the civil lawsuit filed in 2019 is against Scientology and Masterson for harassment.
According to the complaint, Danny's victims had reported the incidents of rape to the church. Instead of referring them to the authorities, however, the church deemed them suppressive persons. In Scientology, the term suppressive person describes an enemy of the church. Scientologists believe that suppressive persons cause severe emotional distress and impede spiritual progress. As a result, any action taken against them is acceptable. The plaintiffs alleged that the church hired private investigators to surveil them. They also claimed that their phones were tapped, emails and bank accounts were hacked, home security systems were breached, and property was destroyed. Chrissy Carnell Bixler has since come forward and identified herself in media reports as being Jane Doe number 3, so we're using her given name here. In 2019, Chrissy was interviewed by actor Leah Remini for Leah's docuseries called Scientology and the Aftermath. In the interview, Chrissy told Leah about a time she and Danny went to a restaurant where they had dinner. She said she had a glass of wine, maybe 2, and the last thing she remembers is getting up to leave the restaurant to go home. Then a complete blackout. Chrissy had been in a relationship with Danny for 6 years in the early 2000s. She met him when she was 18 years old, a model who had just moved to LA. She moved in with him 2 weeks later, and he introduced her to Scientology. In 2001, she says that she blacked out after they had dinner in a restaurant. She woke up in pain the following morning, unable to remember what happened. I was like, "What happened? I have no memory," she said. And he just kind of chuckled, and I said, "I'm in a lot of pain. I'm bleeding. I was ripped. I was injured." I said, "What happened?" And he started laughing, and he said, "Oh, I had sex with you last night." Chrissy's now husband, Cedric Bixler Zavala, is the lead singer of the band Mars Volta. In 2020, he made headlines when he claimed that the Church of Scientology killed his dog to silence them. Danny called the lawsuit beyond ridiculous and vowed to fight it in court. But less than a year later, his legal troubles would worsen. On June 16, 2020, the Los Angeles County District Attorney concluded their investigation and charged him with the rapes of the 3 women. The next day, Danny, then 44 years old, turned himself in to the police. He was released on bond a few hours later. Danny was represented by Tom Mesereau, best known for successfully defending Michael Jackson in his 2005 child molestation trial. He's also represented actor Robert Blake, rapper Suge Knight, and comedian Bill Cosby. In a statement at the time of the arrest, Mesereau said he was confident that Danny would be exonerated when all the evidence finally comes to light and witnesses have the opportunity to testify. A preliminary hearing followed in May 2021. This was to decide if there was enough evidence to take the criminal case to trial. In the hearing, Jane Doe number 1 testified that she knew Danny from Church of Scientology circles in the late 1990s and early 2000s. According to her testimony, Danny first raped her in 2002. Afterwards, she said she confided in an ethics officer at the church who had her complete an ethics program and told her to make peace with what had happened. Then, she said in April 2003, Danny gave her an alcoholic drink while at his house. After consuming the drink, she began to feel disoriented, weak, and nauseous. Jane Doe number 1 tearfully recounted being unable to see and feeling extremely ill. She said Danny carried her upstairs, where he forced her to vomit, and then placed her in the shower. She testified she had moments of consciousness while he soaped her bare breasts. Weakened, she attempted to fight back, but was unsuccessful. Danny then took her to his bed where she passed out. When she woke up, he was raping her. She also testified that Danny took out a gun and threatened her with it and told her not to tell any of her friends, including Lisa Marie Presley. "You're not going to tell fucking Lisa," she recalled him saying. She told the court that the leadership of the Church of Scientology had discouraged her from reporting it, emphasizing the potential consequences of going against a member in good standing like Danny. Despite these pressures, she went to the police in June 2004. She said the chief later called her, telling her, "You have no idea how fucked you are." The investigation was closed, which she said made her feel scared. She eventually signed an NDA and received $400,000 from Danny. During cross-examination, Danny's attorney pointed out that a gun wasn't mentioned in the initial police report. He also highlighted discrepancies between the 2004 report and a 2003 knowledge report Jane Doe number 1 had submitted to the Church of Scientology. Later in the hearing, Chrissy Cornell Bixler, Jane Doe number 3, took the stand. She explained why it had taken her 15 years to go to the police after Danny had allegedly raped her in her sleep. She said at the time of the incident, she too sought guidance from ethics officials within the Church of Scientology, who convinced her not to pursue it. At the end of the hearing, the judge ruled that the case could go forward. A trial date was set for later in the year. Danny pleaded not guilty to the charges, and he had reason to believe he might be acquitted.
In 2020, you could not charge Masterson with any of these individual allegations. Jane Doe 1, the DA could not go to court and say, Danny Masterson raped Jane Doe 1. Couldn't do that because of the time that had passed, right? Statute of limitations. However, there's a strict law in California called the one strike law that is used against heinous crimes, and there's forcible rape qualifies as long as there's multiple, right? So once there are multiple forcible rapes, then and under that law, they qualify. They carry penalties of 15 years to life each.
It's also worth mentioning that once there's a potential life sentence involved, there's no statute of limitations. So that's what the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office did. They brought 3 counts of forcible rape under the one strike law, knowing that they had to have multiple allegations in order for Danny to go to prison. There was also the question of whether the Church of Scientology would be allowed to play a role in the trial proceedings. Attorneys litigated that issue during a preliminary hearing in May 2022. Here's Tony describing, in his words, a very strange blunder by Danny's attorney, Tom Mesereau.
He was cross-examining these women, and one of the things they kept saying was that we didn't come forward sooner because we were afraid of Scientology, and Scientology had told us you can't turn in a fellow Scientologist. And so Mesereau decided to challenge them on that. He brought out Scientology's ethics book, the Introduction to Ethics, and asked Jane Doe 3 to look in it and say, show me where it says that. Look through this chapter, come back after the lunch break and show me if it says that. And after the lunch break, she came back and says, I couldn't find it.
It seemed like a big moment, Tony said, because Mesereau specializes in ending cases in the preliminary hearing phase before they even get to trial. Well, what he didn't know was that the statements about not turning in fellow Scientologists were in the book, just in a different chapter than the one he showed Jane Doe number 3.
So when it was the prosecution's turn, I'll never forget this. The prosecutor walked over to Mesereau and said, "Can I borrow your book, please?" And Mesereau handed it to him. And the prosecutor went over and showed Jane Doe 3 and says, "Right here, doesn't it say that you're not supposed to turn in a fellow Scientologist to civil authorities?" She said, "Yes, it does." And he walked back over and he handed it to Mesereau and he said, "Thank you. That was very helpful." I mean, it was the one Perry Mason moment in this whole case, I think.
According to Tony, every time the defense would try to argue that there were too many mentions of Scientology being brought up, the judge would point out that they were the ones who brought the Scientology book into the courtroom in the first place.
So I think it was a huge blunder by Mesereau, and I have to think he was taking orders from David Miscavige.
David Miscavige being the current leader of the Church of Scientology.
In fact, there was a Scientology attorney sitting next to me that day, and she was rapidly typing everything that was being said. And I really believe she was giving David Miscavige a live blow-by-blow of what was going on in the court. And it was Miscavige who told Mesereau to use that book because she whispered that right next to me. So a really key early moment, and that's just the prelim.
So there were complicated charges due to the complexity of California law and a whole host of information about the Church of Scientology that a jury would have to hear and process.
So that's the challenge that these prosecutors had when the first trial started in October of last year.
The trial began on October 19th, 2022. Danny had a new attorney for the trial, Philip Cohen. And again, Scientology played quite a role.
Cohen wanted all the Scientology out. And he was like, "Listen, this shouldn't be in this trial at all." And again, Judge Olmedo said, "No, these women, it helps understand why they didn't come forward sooner. They were afraid of Scientology." And once again, she pointed out the defense brought the Scientology book in first. So that was what was really interesting to me in that first trial was that, look, of course, I'm interested in the fact that Danny Masterson, a celebrity, is accused of these terrible crimes. But as somebody who reports on Scientology, I was really interested in how much is this trial even going to talk about Scientology. And it turned out there was a lot of Scientology in that first trial.
All three accusers testified. Jane Doe number 1, whose story you heard earlier, testified that Danny raped her and threatened her with a gun. Jane Doe number 2 had a similar story. She said Danny raped her after giving her a glass of wine at his house in 2003. She said he was like a drill sergeant, ordering her to take off her clothes and get in the jacuzzi. She said she felt heavy and numb, telling him that they could not have sex. Danny then had her get in the shower, where he penetrated her against her will. He took her to his bedroom next and then flipped her over and raped her. She said she was in shock and that it hurt so much she almost vomited. She testified that she never reported it to the church. She said she had tried earlier to report a former boyfriend who had also raped her, but that she was told that she was not to accuse another member of the church or to report it to law enforcement. Chrissy Cornell Bixler, Jane Doe number 3, also testified about her harrowing experience. Tony observed the proceedings in person. Of the accusers, he said,
they were remarkable. I mean, they were telling a brutal story. They were being asked questions that were intended to kind of make them seem like their story had changed over time, and they resisted that. I just thought they did a great job.
And it wasn't only Jane Does 1 through 3 who testified.
Besides the 3 Jane Does, they also brought in a Jane Doe 4, Trisha Vesey, the actress. She allowed me to use her real name. And she alleged that she had been raped by Masterson in 1996.
Danny's defense hinged around the credibility of his accusers. They argued that almost 20 years had elapsed since the alleged incidents occurred. This would make accurate memories impossible, they said. They also suggested bias against the Church of Scientology. Danny did not testify, and the defense didn't call any witnesses. Instead, they focused on instances where the women may have colluded and on demonstrating how their stories had changed over the years. Here's Tony describing the cross-examinations.
So the cross-examination was something like this. Okay, so at the wrap party, you went back to Danny Masterson's house. How many glasses of wine did you have? I think I had 3. Okay, but didn't you, when you were interviewed 2 years ago, didn't you say 4?
To an observer, these may have seemed like trivial details, but these questions seemed to have an effect.
But you could see that I think this is pretty standard in these kind of cases where the defense attorney is just trying to raise the question in the jury's mind. Are these women reliable? Can we rely on their details?
Both sides made their closing arguments on November 14th, 2022. The jury deliberated for 3 days, but couldn't reach a unanimous decision. The judge ordered them to resume deliberations after Thanksgiving. After several more days, the jury remained deadlocked, and so the judge declared a mistrial. The foreman noted that the jury had leaned towards acquitting Danny. They had found the testimonies of the accusers to be inconsistent and implausible, with one of the accusers' mention of a gun being a credibility issue. By the end of the month, a retrial date was set for March 27, 2023. In the meantime, Danny was free on $3.3 million bail. During the first trial, the judge had barred one crucial element of the victims' stories. They could not testify that Danny had drugged them. Instead, it was only implied in the testimony. The women spoke of being woozy, disoriented, or unconscious. For the second trial, the prosecution was allowed to mention drugs. While this added crucial context to their stories, it was also hard to prove it 15 years after the fact. Danny's attorney, Philip Cohen, stressed this point. There's no toxicology report. There's no urine, no blood work, no DNA. Cohen also used the issue of drugs to point out the inconsistencies in one of the witnesses' stories. According to Cohen, one of the women who claimed that Danny raped her in 2003 did not mention drugs when discussing the incident with her friends and with her mother. He argued that drugs only became part of her story during the subsequent police investigation. He also told the court that the similarities in the women's stories came from them talking and sharing details with each other, even after being warned by the detective that it could impact the case. So Danny Masterson had several points in his favor, but according to Tony Ortega, the prosecution was able to tell a more coherent story the second time around.
Also, they were much stronger about putting things together. I think in the first trial, they were saying, they were giving some evidence that he'd given women something to drink, giving evidence that the women felt suspiciously intoxicated, and then giving women evidence about the rape, and kind of expecting the jury to kind of put it all together. Second trial, Errol Anson just comes out and says, this man drugged these women and raped them, and the Church of Scientology protected him.
The defense hated it. They objected. They tried to call for a mistrial, but they were unsuccessful.
I think the result speaks for itself. There's no question. It was a stronger presentation of material. The women, again, they did a great job, except in the second trial, you could see that the Jane Does could kind of anticipate where Cohen's sort of attacks were going to come from. And they were kind of getting out in front of it a little bit. And so they told the same stories, but it just seems like it was a little more effective. And some of Cohen's tricks that he used the first time just weren't as effective the second time.
After the prosecution and defense rested in the second trial, it came time for the jury to deliberate. Nearly a week went by with Tony in court every day, waiting for the results.
Which, for 4 weeks of 4 weeks of testimony, 7 or 8 days of deliberation is kind of long. And I can tell you that most of us reporters waiting around every day, we're thinking, here we go, we're going to get another hung jury. And then at that morning of May 31st, we got a buzz from the jury room, and the clerk went to check it out. And then suddenly there was stuff going on. What's going on? Somebody tell us what's going on. And the clerk finally said, after lunch, we want everybody in the courtroom. Masterson, the family, everybody. Whoa, okay, something's going on. So we went to lunch. We came back. Now, that hallway would get really crowded after lunch. And I'm standing there waiting, and I want to make sure I get my usual seat. So I'm standing pretty close to the door. I'm literally 2 or 3 feet away from Danny, his wife Bijou, the rest of the family. They're all there. And I can tell you, they were buoyant. I think, like the reporters, they expected we were going to hear about a hung jury. I really do. I think they were, believe me, they seemed like, oh, this is it. We're going to get out of here.
Everyone took their seats. The judge then came in and announced that there were 2 verdicts.
We have 2 verdicts, and they were unable to come up with a verdict on the 3rd count. And then it was like, whoa, 2. But remember, going into this thing, the DA filed 3, knowing they needed 2.
Recall that California has that one-strike law, which holds that any person convicted of sex crimes, including certain aggravating factors, such as multiple proven victims, will automatically receive an enhanced sentence of 15 years, 25 years, or life in state prison.
So now the judge has told us there's 2 verdicts. Ooh, nervous time. So they give the forms to the clerk, and the clerk starts reading it. Count 1, guilty. Uh-oh. Count 2. As soon as he says guilty, I hear this bizarre sound. What is that? This otherworldly wail. And I realize it's Bijou, right? Bijou Phillips sitting like 10 feet in front of me. And it's this weird wail that then becomes sobbing, very loud. And Judge Olmedo stops and says, I'm sorry, you're going to have to compose yourself, or she's going to have to leave. And she quieted down, but she's crying. And then the third count was hung. They could not come up with a verdict. But they had the 2 guilties. Remember what I said? They needed 2 guilties, and they had it. So at that point, they asked Masterson to stand up, and a female deputy came over and handcuffed him. I think a lot of people thought that was symbolic and interesting.
The news was heard around the world.
That's right. Actor Danny Masterson, made famous from that 70s show, has been found guilty on 2 of 3 counts of rapes here at LA Superior Court. Now, once the verdicts were read, he was immediately handcuffed and remanded into custody. And we're hearing at that time, his wife let out a very loud cry in the courtroom and began sobbing.
The jury had found Danny Masterson guilty of the rapes of Jane Doe No. 1 and Jane Doe No. 2, but they were hung on the charge of rape against Jane Doe No. 3, who had come forward as Chrissy Carnell Bixler. The jury was reportedly divided, with 8 favoring a guilty verdict. Chrissy released a statement to the public after the verdict, saying, I am devastated that he has dodged criminal accountability for his heinous conduct against me. Despite my disappointment in this outcome, I remain determined to secure justice, including in civil court, where I, along with my co-plaintiffs, will shine a light on how Scientology and other conspirators enabled and sought to cover up Masterson's monstrous behavior. Leah Remini posted on Instagram to commend the victims. The women who survived Danny Masterson's predation are heroes, she wrote. For years, they and their families have faced attacks and harassment from Scientology and from Danny's well-funded legal team. Nevertheless, they soldiered on, determined to seek justice. About a week after the conclusion of the trial, Danny's former attorneys, Tom Mesereau and his co-counsel, were reportedly fined for leaking confidential information about the victims to the Church of Scientology's attorney in the civil lawsuit. And that lawsuit, which the victims filed in 2019 against Danny and the church, is still ongoing. They're seeking damages for the harassment they say they experienced after coming forward. In response, the church has argued that 4 of the now 5 plaintiffs had signed contracts that required them to take their complaints to the church's internal arbitration process. Judge Stephen Clyfield agreed and ordered the case to arbitration in December 2020. The plaintiffs then asked an appeals court to intervene. The following January, the 3-judge panel overturned Judge Clyfield's order and sent the case back to his court. The judges made it clear that the former Scientologists should not be forced into a religious contract they had signed years earlier. The Church of Scientology has since declared its intention to take the case to the Supreme Court. They say that the ruling violates the First Amendment right to freedom of religion. As for whether they will find success, it's hard to say. The Supreme Court of the United States receives around 9,000 to 10,000 petitions each year. Of these, only about 1% are granted review with oral arguments, and an additional 50 to 60 are disposed of without review. In total, the Supreme Court hears about 80 cases a year. As for Danny Masterson, he remains in custody, awaiting sentencing. He faces 30 years to life in prison. And that's all for this episode. As always, I'd love to hear what you think about this case. Let me know by joining the conversation on Instagram at Court Junkie, by tweeting us at CourtJunkiePod, or by emailing us at podcast@courtjunkie.com. This episode was researched and written by Matt Stroud and Joseph L. Flatley. Many thanks to Tony Ortega for his insights. To read more from Tony, please check out his Substack, The Underground Bunker, at tonyortega.substack.com. If you'd like to hear these episodes without the ads, hear additional Court Junkie bonus episodes, or get access to our weekly newsletter regarding fascinating court cases, check out our Patreon options at courtjunkie.com/support. Also, be sure to check out our sister podcast, Civil, which covers interesting civil cases and trials. You can subscribe by searching for Civil Court Junkie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.